Hey, this is a continuation of the C#.NET WinForms simple calculator application that we've already done a tutorial on. I got a few requests to do some of the cleanup that I kind of alluded to at the end of that previous video. There's obviously lots of things that you could do to improve the application on the whole, to tighten the screws and make the functionality be a little more robust. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to kind of keep going on or building on what we did previously. So some of these are going to be very simple mods, and then some are going to be a little bit more involved, but will provide some features and some capabilities that make it even more closely resemble the actual WinForms calculator. So the first thing I'm going to do, just kind of four things that I have on the list here, but the first thing I'm going to do, if we run this application where we left off on the last tutorial, we disabled the maximize button. However, you can still resize the application manually if you choose to. You can minimize it, obviously, but this is somewhat, you don't really probably want this. So we can tighten the screws here and clean this up. Now, the way that we would do that is very simply by coming into our designer view here, selecting the calculator or the form one selected, and you'll see that whatever size we have our window assigned to, it shows up in the size property. Now, what we can do is we can copy these values, and you have two additional properties, one called maximum size, one of them called minimum size. So I'm just going to paste these exact same dimensions for maximum and minimum. Very simple fix, right? So when we run it now, we can't resize our application. So that's a little bit cleaner, right? Makes a little more sense. So we can't get any kind of funky UI look and feel where buttons disappear and get squished and that sort of thing. So now it's really a static size. So that's probably the easiest thing. Another issue that we could tighten the screws on is using the decimal point, right? So if I do 2.3 and I click the decimal point again, I can add decimal points all day long, which is not really mathematically sound. So let's add some logic into our uh, click function, where we say basically we're going to check our result text box to see if there is already a decimal point. So let's do this. We get the button, we cast the sender object to a button, and then basically all we're doing is appending whatever the label of the button is to our text box here. We're just adding it onto the end. So let's put a little bit of logic in here that basically says if uh, b dot text equals a decimal point, we want to handle this a little bit differently, right? Else we can kind of go about our merry way as we have been, right? We don't need to do any sort of other logic to evaluate anything. We just simply need to append that number to the end of our text field. Now inside this conditional logic statement that we've built here, if it is a decimal, we also want to check to see if um, result.text contains a decimal point already. Now if it does, we don't want to basically append anything to our text box. We don't want to append another decimal point, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually make this negative or false, the opposite. And I'm going to say if that's the case, then we can add it on, right? So if it does not contain a decimal place already, then we're free to add it. If it does, this will resolve as false, and we won't append that decimal point. This should work, I think, right? So 3.3, you see I'm clicking point, it's not getting anything, right? Plus 1.7 equals 5, and so forth, okay? So that's the next, that's just a little easy thing just to make sure that we don't allow the user to add multiple decimal points, because if we do, we're going to run into runtime exceptions because we haven't tried to trap those kinds of errors where we convert our string, which might have multiple decimal places in it or decimal points in it, to an actual number, which would obviously cause problems. So those are the two easy ones to knock out. Now, someone posted a comment to the original video saying it would be nice to be able to um, sort of emulate the Windows calculator in that you don't have to press equals every time. right? So we can keep basically hitting other operators and sort of string together several operations instead of the way that our application is built right now is basically you would have to do 1 plus 3 equals 4 plus 3 equals 7 plus 6 equals. So basically you end up having to work that equals button in there every single time you want to do a calculation instead of allowing the same sort of functionality to occur when you press an operator. So let's make those let's make that change, and I'll just show you how it works inside of the application right now. So if I do 2 plus 3 plus 6, you'll notice that I don't get what I'm looking for, right? 2 plus 3, oops, let me clear that out. 2 plus 3 is 5 plus 5, we should get 10, right? We get 8. So something's not happening correctly, and we're not able to string together multiple operations at the same time. So let's go ahead and tackle that. Now, basically, the way that we've set this up previously is that we have an event handler for these four buttons that's different than the event handler for the equals button. But what we're saying is basically, or kind of what we're aiming for, is basically to have similar functionality occur when these buttons are pressed as when the equal button is pressed if there's already a value sort of in our calculator, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here to our operator click, which is what we have right here, and our button 16 click. Now button 16 is our equal button. You'll see that over here. Probably could have named that something nicer than button 16, but for now we'll leave it that way. So button 16, and this is our event handler for when we press the equal button. So we're going to do two things to kind of remedy this situation. First thing we're going to do is we're going to modify this method, this event handler, to basically reset the value, um, reset the value variable that we've assigned up here to kind of keep our running total, which is how we're using that, to whatever is in the text box after we press enter, okay? Or after this event gets fired. And actually, you know what? Res value is a number, so I have to parse this out, right? The other thing that I'm going to do is after we press enter, essentially there should be no operator stored, right? We shouldn't have anything in our operator variable, which is what we use to determine whether we're adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. So I'm also going to reset that to just an empty string. Okay. This way we don't get any, accidentally stored operators when we're trying to do, additional math, additional logic, that sort of thing. So very easy mod right here, right? We're going to reset the value to whatever is showing in our text box after this event gets fired, right? After the equal event gets fired. And then we're also going to reset our operation variable to an empty string, which if this method were called or if this event were fired while this was the case, what would happen when we switch on operation is we wouldn't match any of these cases and we would simply hit the default case and we would just break out of the switch. So nothing would happen. Okay, so that's exactly kind of what we're going for. Now the other area we need to make a change is we need to have some logic built into operator click, right? Right now, when we push any of these four buttons, the operator click method gets fired. And what happens is we basically assign the operation um, string variable according to the button that was pressed, right? Add, subtract, multiply, divide. We assign value according to whatever number has been typed in up to that point. So if we typed 12 and then we hit plus, value would hold our 12 so that we could begin typing a new number to actually do the other half of the math problem, right? We have a Boolean variable that we're keeping track of that says that operation was pressed. And then we basically update the equation text value, which was the little text field over here that we created that says, 12 plus, this would show 12 plus, and then we could type in the value, press equals, and get our answer, right? So this is all well and good when we don't already have a value stored, right? Because if we don't have a value stored, that means we haven't pressed enter, essentially. Or I'm sorry, equals. We haven't pressed equals. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some logic outside of here that says if value does not equal 0, we're going to do something a little bit different. Else we're going to do basically what we've been doing, right? Now, if value does not equal 0, what I want to do is I want to manually basically perform an event that fires this, right? If I hit 3 plus 3 plus 3, that second plus should fire the same logic that occurs when we press the equals button, right? That's kind of what we're going for. Now you can manually fire events. Recall that this is button 16. Our equal button is button 16. You can say button 16 dot perform click, and that basically emulates the user clicking on that equal button, right? And it fires the event for you. So we're going to fire that event. We're still going to update our operation press to true, right? Because that is true. We did press an operator. Um, we're still going to get what the operation is, right? We still need to know what that is. And then what we're going to do is we're going to update our equation text, right? So if we update our equation text, which is the little piece on the left there that just shows what math we're doing so far, I think this will cover the bases for us. We'll try it in a second and hopefully make this happen like we want it to. So let's see what we get here. Okay, so if I hit 3 plus 3, I should see this become 6. This should become 6 if I hit enter, right? Well, I guess that clears out. So that should be 6, right? If I hit 3 plus 3, that gives me 6. If I hit plus 3 again, I should get 9. Plus 3 or plus 1 equals 10, right? And then if I do 10 minus 3 is 7 plus 5 is 12, right? So you get the point. That basically solves the problem. The functionality runs a little bit differently than the way the Windows calculator actually works, where you can do 1 plus 2 plus 3. Basically, this ends up sort of growing and appending each time we press it until you press enter. But it still basically gives you the correct answer as you go. So we haven't done anything to make that label update, and that's kind of a nice feature, but I'm not going to go down that road. You guys could probably figure out how to make that happen if you'd like to. The last thing I'm going to address, though, before we get out of here again, is with the Windows calculator that we have, you can use the number pad if you have a number pad on your keyboard or numbers on your notepad keyboard that will allow you to type stuff as you go, right? So I'm not clicking here, I'm just typing. So it would be kind of nice to provide that same capability, right, inside of our application. So what we're going to do, which and it actually honestly isn't that complicated. Let's go back into our designer. Let's select our form. Now there's an event associated with WinForms called Keypress. Where are we at? Keypress, right here. So what I'm going to do, make sure you have your form selected. Form 1 is selected. I'm going to double click in Keypress. That's going to create my my method for me, my event handler for me, um, so that we can capture events whenever a key is pressed on our keyboard. Now, in order for this to work, there's one other setting on the form that we have to tweak. Okay, so go back to your properties of your form and find a property called Key Preview. Key Preview right here. By default, it's set to false. We want to make that true. Okay. Now, let's come back into, I tell you what, before we do that, let's make some of these buttons a little more intuitive in terms of names, right? This is where it does kind of matter. I'm going to rename all of my buttons to basically describe what button they are, right? So 0, and bear with me as we do this. This is not really exciting. Decimal, right? Oops, I'll call it des. We have 1, 2, again, not really exciting, but this is probably best practices anyways. We probably should have done this the first go round. If we're talking about pragmatics, we're talking about making code easy to use and easy to work with, using instant names that uh, better represent what the actual button is the best way to go. But you'll see why I want to do this here in just a moment. So we'll say this is div. We'll call it times sub add and we'll do equal. All right. So I basically renamed all of these buttons with the exception of these two because for now we're not going to do any sort of key press association with these two buttons, but we are with the rest of them. Okay, so we've renamed all of our instances of buttons to more sort of semantically sound, make sense, right? The 5 button is called 5, the instance of that button. So let's go in here and basically what happens when a key press happens or the event is fired is we get the object that was pressed, right? Or that was associated with the key press. In this case, it's going to be our form. But we also get key press event arguments, and it's called E. And so what we can do is we can create a switch statement and basically evaluate which key was pressed, whether it was a numeric key, whether it was a decimal, whether it was a a letter, etc. We can get access to that, right? We can know what was actually pressed by the user. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a switch statement, and I'm going to switch on E, which is our key press event argument that gets passed to this method, dot keychar, and I'm just going to convert it to a string. Okay. Now what you'll see here as we get along the way is that this is very easy to do, right? So let's create a case statement for the number 1, and let's say if 1 is pressed, if the user presses the number 1 on a keypad, what button do we want to fire, right? We want to fire this button right here, right? So we can do just like we did up here with our manual key press, we can say 1, which is a button that we've renamed that has 1 on it, right? This button right here. We can say 1 dot perform click, right? And then we can break. And then let's go ahead and put our default in here just so I can show you guys how this is going to work just with 1 pressed. Right? Let's run this, okay? So we only are basically accepting keyboard input. We're only doing something if the number 1 is pressed. But let's just give it a shot and see if it works as we think it's going to work. So I basically have my form selected. I'm going to press, I'll start with 2. 2 doesn't do anything. 3, 4, 5, nothing's happening. But when I press 1, you'll notice that 1 gets appended just as though we were clicking it, right? Exactly the kind of functionality that we're going for. So let's fill this out, right? So we need to go 1 through, actually, I guess we need to go 0 through 9, right? So let's do 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? So 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9, right? So obviously this is 0, right? That we want to perform the click. 1, we want to perform the click. 2, and again, this is why we renamed this, right? Otherwise, we'd have button 8, button 6, button 7, which doesn't necessarily correlate to the value that's actually shown on the button or the button that we're pressing. So the renaming of the instances is actually really beneficial here because it makes this a lot easier. Otherwise, I'd be going back and forth trying to figure out which button is which button, which is a pain in the butt. Okay, and we can do this the same with the operators, right? Oops. So add, subtract, multiply, divide, right? Add, subtract, multiply, and divide, right? So add, sub, multiply, or what did I say, times, I think is what I called it, and div. And then the last one we had was equal, right? So if it's equal, equal, right? Now let's see what we get when we run this. If I say 5 plus 3 equals 8, right? Um, Maybe we want to do 5 plus, oops, let me clear that out. You know what, when we should probably clear this out too. I'll fix that in a second. Um, Maybe we want the equals to actually be the equal button, or I'm sorry, the enter button. So if I do 6, plus 5 and press enter, I would rather have enter equate to the equal button as well. So let's copy this guy one more time. And I think we can do this. might be, it's either enter or return. And just to be sure, I'm going to do, actually, you know what? There's one way, easy way to find this out. Let's do this. When we press a button, let's just show a message box. So you can Google it or you can kind of trial and error, right? E dot keychar dot toString. So what this is going to do basically is when we press a button, it's going to show us the value of that button, okay? So I'm doing this just to, because I'm not 100% sure how this is represented as a string. So let's do this. So if I press 1, you see we get a message box that shows a 1. Now if I press enter, oops, I don't get anything. Interesting. I guess the enter is, I guess it's because this button is selected that we're getting the 7s. Okay, you know what? We'll circle the wagons on that one maybe. Do a little Googling and you can probably figure out how to override that. Probably something as simple as deselecting the button and then capturing that equal press. But for now, we'll leave that out just because I don't exactly know without doing a little Googling myself how to override that at the moment. The last thing we were going to say is when we press the clear and the clear entry button, or actually I should say the clear button, um, we want to not only reset the result.txt and the value, but we want to say reset our, what's it called? Operators, what do we call it? Let's see, equation.txt. There we go. And that will solve that problem, right? So if we do 5 plus and we hit clear, that clears that out as well. Cool. So just a couple little tweaks, tightening the screws. Again, this is by far from perfect, without a doubt. But there's just a few things to kind of enhance it, make it a little bit better, tighten the screws a little bit. You can certainly take this even farther. So good luck with that, and take care.